Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for one of the CREST IR presentations that we'll be running throughout the day. We are starting off with a really interesting presentation this morning on APT39, and this will be by Adam Bridge from FIREEYE Mandiant. So I will be passing over to him very shortly, but just while people are still coming into the room, just wanted to go through a few things with regards to questions and answers. So, and I will just cover it probably again in a few seconds because we've got a lot of people coming in at the moment. But if you do want to ask a question, then please feel free to. There is a question pane that you can type into, and you can then ask any of the questions that you wish to. Please feel free to do it whilst you are in the presentation so that you don't forget anything at the end, and we will try and get those questions asked of Adam as quickly as possible. So we will get started in a second. So a few more people have come on, so please feel free to ask any questions at the end of this presentation, and I will pass over to Adam now. Thank you very much, Adam.
That's great. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Yeah, my name's Adam. I'm talking to you on behalf of, excuse me, FIREEYE Mandiant, and I'll be talking to you, as you can see from the start slide, about APT39 in real life. So this is, I guess my slides, here we go. This is a war story. This is the story of us coming into contact with APT39 during an incident. But I think it's a particularly interesting example of how we have to deal with this kind of attacker, the things that can go wrong, and what do you do when they go wrong. So the background to this, we were actually investigating a financially motivated breach in a completely different company, Company B, and that was a financially motivated breach, a financially motivated actor. That was not APT39. But in an attempt to identify the patient zero for this Company B intrusion, we've been following some breadcrumbs, and we were trying to identify our patient zero. A laptop belonging to Company A, our victim company for this scenario, was being forensically analysed. Traditional sort of dead box hard disk forensics to see what artifacts remained. And in case it's not obvious, the reason for that is because there is a commercial relationship between those two companies. Excuse me. So what we found when examining that laptop from, say, the other company was nothing at all to do with the financially motivated attack, which was the one that we were actually investigating, but instead a load of artifacts showing that an administrative tool had been used to remotely control the computer. For those that are interested and those that will recognize it, the tool in question was actually PSExec, a very common tool, a legitimate tool, but often used by attackers to move around the network. And what was extremely powerful for us was that the IOCs that we were, the IOCs that we'd found fit perfectly with the notification document that had been received from the NCSC, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. Worth pointing out, that was actually during this engagement that the UNC, I'll talk about that in just a moment, was promoted to APT39. So just very quickly on that, as is common for IR firms like FIREEYE, when we have an attacker and we don't know who they are, as is often the case right at the beginning of attack, they're known as an UNC, a UNC, an unclassified. And if we can learn more about them and we can cluster various UNCs together, they will, over time, over a very arduous process, get promoted to an APT. And it's actually during this engagement that a cluster of UNCs were promoted to APT39. So this is where we're at this engagement, is that we'd been quite lucky. We'd investigating this laptop because we thought it would be related to this other attack, and we stumbled across this. This was almost pure luck that we found strong IOCs linking to APT39. So with this company, this was very much, stealth mode enabled. There's kind of two approaches to this when you discover an attack in your network. One is to sit and watch and learn as much as you possibly can. The other is kind of the all guns blazing, whack-a-mole, let's get them out as quickly as we can. Every situation is different, every IR is different, but we try to encourage that first one, that stealth mode. Let's learn as much as we can to get the most effective remediation down the line. There are often business reasons why you can't do that. If you've got data leaving, through the front door right now, you might not be able to do that. But we do try and get into this sort of stealth mode and watch and learn. What we figured out from this watch and learn was that our attackers were coming straight in via the VPN. It was a 1FA VPN. We observed them, from the log analysis of the VPN. They successfully logged on as 15 users, as you can see with the asterisk there. We saw that they actually tried to log in with 76 different usernames, but many of those failed, and we think that's because not all users have privileges to use the VPN. So perhaps they had the wrong password, but we think it's perhaps because they were just simply using user accounts that didn't have VPN privileges. And we saw them coming from 6 different IP addresses. Very notable that the IP addresses from which they were coming were in the same country as the victim. Yep, so that is not the same country as where we believe APT39 operate out of. So from that, we're saying that they rented or hired, obtained infrastructure in the victim country, presumably to add legitimacy to the origin IP addresses of this VPN. So that's how they were getting in, 1FA VPN. And what they were doing whilst they were in, because we had an EDR deployed, we actually had very good visibility inside this mostly Windows network. It was mostly a Windows network. Is that they were doing traditional reconnaissance. They were scanning for online Windows endpoints. Excuse me. Using classic Windows tools like NBT scan. They would then connect to that endpoint using normal Windows networking technology, and they were just literally browsing around for PDF files, Excel files, document files, picture files, just general documents. It very much felt like this is the reconnaissance phase. They are still just looking for stuff. How did we know this? This is from the artifacts like MRUs, and most recently used, link files, all of those good forensic artifacts that tell you what files they were looking at. Just a point, already at this point, this is a GDPR nightmare. This is documents being viewed, spreadsheets, who knows what kind of PII is contained in those documents. The client ended up having to have a process whereby we would tell them, this is the documents that the attackers have looked at, and they would have to go off and get a copy of those documents, have them reviewed by, the data protection team, and make a decision as to whether there was any data in there that constituted PII, because obviously if it did, we would be looking at 72 hours notification to the ICO. So, this is another thing in the mix here is the GDPR side of this. Excuse me. This is not a few hours, this is a few days. We couldn't simply throw the switch and turn off the VPN. It was business critical. That just was not an option. We couldn't either just quickly chuck in a 2FA module into the VPN. The VPN tech was too old. We just literally could not do that. The organization were already in the process of upgrading their VPN technology so that they could have 2FA, but that was weeks, if not months away from actually happening. So that's why we're kind of stuck in this position of we need to watch them, and then if we think things are getting a bit, not good, we're gonna have to make some decisions. So as I like to do, I tried plotting a diagram of where they were going. The diagram got very messy very quickly, and I kind of had to abandon it. But this was how it looked at the point that I had to just abandon it because the attackers were going everywhere. You can see I blocked out things like host names and things. But the attacker, Schaefer as they were at the time, because they hadn't yet been promoted to APT39, we saw them coming in from 4 different hosts out on the internet. We see them coming in through the VPN. They land in the VPN pool as you'd expect. They would RDP onto a staging server, and then they would move laterally from that staging server inside the network. This is very normal reconnaissance. VPN in, jump to your staging server, and then operate from your staging server. But I say, I had to ban this diagram because it just got too messy. Okay, so what do we see them actually do? There are a couple of bespoke tools. So you're about to see some red bannered slides. So slides with the red banner. These are, to the best of our knowledge, bespoke to APT39. So one of these tools we call SANDSPY. This is a Windows service. It loads an encoded file called slv.dat, say, which is hard-coded in that file name is hard-coded into the binary every time you've observed it. We observe it installed on 14 different servers. And this was a pretty traditional backdoor. Yeah, it provided comms with the C2, provided file upload and download capability, and of course, the ability to execute commands of the attacker's choosing. What you're seeing on the right-hand side there in the red banner is the XML, and that's the decoded slv.dat. And what you're seeing there is all the information needed. So where's the C2 endpoint? What's the name of the service? If we were to see that listed in the Windows services, what would be the description of the service? You can see the host names in there, the IP address of the C2, the resource on that C2 server, and right at the bottom there, that DT91. There in that field there was the proxy. So this was proxy aware as well. What else did we see them use? We saw them use a backdoor that we came to name Trend Cloud for the simple reason that that's what they called it. We'd never seen this before. This is the first time that we'd observed this. We think they'd called it this because it was a convenient name, as in the victim organization were using this technology. And so we think the attacker simply chose this name because it blended in quite nicely. It didn't have a persistence mechanism, so it wasn't a Windows service like the previous one we saw, and we only actually saw it on one server. Again, typical backdoor technology, comms with C2, file upload, download, execute commands, and you can see from in the red banner here, this was how the command line would look. As you can see, you can guess from those parameters, S for server and P for proxy. Nice and straightforward. And finally, what good attacker doesn't have some web shells? We saw some web shells on 2 different OWA servers. But this all, interestingly, this organization, so this OWA servers on premises. This organization does have Office 365. So it became a bit of a question of, well, if you've got Office 365, why have you got OWA servers on-prem? Are they not needed? Can we decom them? And we actually started that process. We actually raised all the change management to actually just get those servers decommissioned. They're not needed anymore, get rid of them, and that removes the web shell and of course any future web shells. But at the last minute, at this sort of the 11th hour, there was this shout of kind of, oh, actually, hang on, those OWA servers do some relaying of traffic for various business reasons. So we do need those, so we can't decommission them. So please leave those alone. The reason for the big red arrow is, remember this, we will come back to this later. And excuse me, the next bespoke tool that we saw was one we call QANAT. It's a HTTP tunnel. We saw it on 2 servers. We typically observe this to be used to tunnel RDP over HTTP. As you can see from the banner on the right-hand side here, there's a load of command line parameters for this. Most of them you could guess. So we've got the IP address there of the C2, the port to use, a username and password to use, the proxy type, proxy IP, proxy port, source IP, source port, local IP, local port. And as I said, typically we see it to tunnel RDP. And in the examples that we saw for this organization, the local port was indeed 3389, which, as I'm sure most of you know, is indeed, excuse me, Microsoft RDP. So yes, we saw them using QANAT to tunnel RDP over HTTP traffic. So away from the red banners now into the orange banners, which are just customized tools. There's only one of these actually, and they evidently have a custom version of Mimikatz. We observed it as called MNL.exe. There's both a 32-bit and a 64-bit version, but essentially all they'd done was taken Mimikatz, they had compiled it into a script that ran the Mimikatz command you can see there, so the debug privileges, and then basically just dumping the credentials, the passwords from memory. So probably the bit of Mimikatz that attackers like to use the most, and they just scripted it into a one-hit exe. So rather than just run Mimikatz and run the command, they could just double click the exe or just run the exe, and it would do the the password dump. I say the most common use. And finally, moving into our sort of greenish blue banner, we actually observe them using, I'm still not sure whether this is pronounced LaZagne or LaZagne or how this is pronounced, but this is an open source tool which allows recovery of passwords saved on the endpoint. Excuse me. We only ever observed it used with the browser's parameter, i.e. to steal passwords from web browsers. LaZagne does more than that, but we only ever saw them do that, use that parameter. So those are the tools that they've been using. We know that they're hunting on the network. We know that they've been looking at documents and things. So we know they're into the reconnaissance, but what is it they're after? And it actually became pretty apparent quite quickly what they were after. They seemed to focus their efforts on the significant Oracle databases that were present within this organization. We saw them scanning for MS SQL and Oracle ports, so doing the port scanning, looking for those servers, of which there definitely were plenty in this organization. And as with most organizations, those databases stored not only mission critical data, but also data that had value to nation states. Information that certainly a nation state would be interested in. And don't want to say too much for obvious reasons, but it made sense that a nation state was going after these databases. Excuse me. They were using a tool called Navicat. It's a commercially available tool. It's very good in terms of it's easy to install. It supports a whole load of different database types, as in MS SQL, Oracle, Postgres, SQLite. It's a very good tool. We were never actually able to find out how they got the creds to be able to authenticate to the database servers. We never found that out, but they evidently did because they were doing it. Now, Navicat does actually generate a log of its activity. So we were able to, and you can turn that off. So we're not sure whether the attackers either didn't know that you could turn it off or that they didn't care. But we were actually able to, using the EDR tooling, every time they did something using Navicat, we were able to pull the EDR log, pull the Navicat log using our EDR tool and figure out what they were doing. They were taking their time. They were not just hitting databases, dumping data and running away with it. They were taking their time. They were running queries against the database very, very much to understand the structure of the database, what tables are contained in there, what are the field names, how many rows. But interestingly, they were not taking data. And so what we were doing was providing these regular updates back to the management team. At the same time, you can imagine the remediation, the planning, the tactical fixes are coming along, but the customer needs to be constantly updated to the risk. Right? That customer is always balancing what is the risk to my data, to my organization, compared to what action we could do that would be damaging. If it really came to it, could we just pull the plug on the VPN? Could we do that, or would it just cripple our business? Those are the kind of decisions that the C-suite are having to make, and we have to give them as much information as we can to inform that. And this was the problem that we had. We could tell that by watching what they were doing, interacting with the databases, that they were getting really close to a point. It felt like, as we were looking at it, that we were getting really close to a point where they were just going to do that massive select query and take the lot. And so I had to bring it up to the C-suite, and I had to say, we need to do something, and we need to do it now, because if we just keep watching them, this is going to end badly. So the timeline that we had at the time of this conversation was that our big remediation event was 2 weeks away. The C-suite said, you haven't got 2 weeks anymore, you've got 2 days. So as is tradition, we all run around with our hair on fire, and we knocked this plan together. It came out to be very well planned. This is not just FIREEYE Mandiant. This is obviously working very closely with the other teams involved. There was other third-party organizations there. There were the IT team of the company themselves. Everybody is working really well, and we had a very, very effective plan, as you would expect. It's staged. What are the pre-tasks? What are the tasks on the day? Every task probably leads on to subsequent tasks. They're all timed. So we'd raised tickets in advance for the change management process. This was a process that we were confident this was going to work well. So on the Friday, for those of you that know about APT39, you might have a good reason as to why we chose a Friday. So on a Friday, we decided we would cut off the VPN, and then we would do all of our blocking. So we block all the C2, we remove all of the SANDSPY, the web shells, all those other tools we spoke about, and we would do a full password reset for all VPN users, and then we put the VPN back on. The idea being that we've affected a remediation, right? They've got no back doors anymore because we removed them, and they can't come in through the front door because all of the VPN passwords have been changed. Yeah, so as long as we haven't missed anything, we should be golden, okay? That was the plan. The plan started at 0550, and it was done by 10:07, and it went extremely well. Everybody was very happy with themselves, cakes and medals all round, until the following morning. And next day at 05:59, the attackers re-entered the network via the VPN. As you can imagine, this was a bit of a shocker for everyone. There was no signs of any backdoors being triggered. We had no EDR alerts. They just seemed to come straight back in through the VPN. You know, I considered whether the VPN had some sort of 0-day, because they just seemed to, it was as if we hadn't done a thing. They just walked in. And what we actually found out was, when we looked at the logs, we could see they had tried to log in, it had failed, and then 2 minutes later, literally 2 minutes later, they logged in successfully as the same user they had just failed as. We got HR to phone that user and ask them, when you changed your password, how different was it to the password that you had originally? And the answer was, I incremented the number on the end by 1. So if their password had been bananas2, the password had become bananas3. And we can only assume that the attackers thought as much. They tried to log in, password didn't work, and perhaps, you can imagine it in the office or in the chat, have you tried adding 1 to the password on the end? They perhaps did so and logged in successfully. You can imagine this did not go down well. There were some tough conversations between that employee and his boss, but we solved it. We changed that user's password. However, this actually happened twice. Exactly the same thing happened again. The attackers tried logging on as a different user. It didn't work. 2 minutes later, they tried again. HR phoned the user, asked the user. The user says, I incremented the number on the end by 1. A real moment of, well, this clearly isn't going to work. And by this point, this is very much stealth mode disabled. Yeah, because at this point, the attackers are in. They know that we're onto them because their accounts are not working. And so stealth mode is gone, and we are very much into whack-a-mole mode. That second option that I spoke about at the beginning. So Operation Whack-a-Mole looked something like this. There would be a VPN logon from some user somewhere. The attackers would fire an EDR alert on some system somewhere. We would trace the hops to find where the attacker was. We would kill the various sessions, and we would disable that user to be able to use the VPN. And this went on a few times, 3 or 4 iterations of the attacker logging on as a different person. We would trace them, kill the VPN session, and this whack-a-mole going on, until eventually this happened. There was an EDR alert. We traced the hops. We killed the various Windows sessions, the RDP sessions, but there simply was no VPN session. The attacker had given up coming in via the VPN, evidently, and this stumped us a bit because we now didn't know how they were getting into the network. We actually ended up tracing some of these hops to an endpoint on the network that nobody knew anything about. It was we traced it to some machine, it had a name, and we were like, can we log onto this machine, please? Because we're tracing the hops, we're trying to see what sessions they've got. And nobody recognized the name of the machine, nobody had any passwords. We even asked them to check those secret passwords that they keep in the drawer that they don't tell their bosses about. Even those passwords didn't work. We could not log on onto this machine. Late nights ensued. Hotel room meetings, trying to rack our brains as to what on earth this endpoint was. It wasn't somewhere that we could physically walk up to it and have a look. It was geographically located somewhere quite far away. Eventually, we figured out that this machine this dull machine that no one knew anything about actually belonged to a whole different company. So our company is company A, and it's being hopped into from company C, a whole different company, not company A, not company B I spoke about right at the beginning, but a whole different company. And it's because the infrastructure looked something like this. The attacker was coming in via the internet into company C. Company A sold backup services to company C. And via this backup LAN, the attackers were coming in, hopping through that backup LAN back into the network. So they're no longer coming in via the VPN. They were doing hops through an entirely different third party. We engage with company C. We reach out to company C and we say, hey, hey, we think you've got a problem. We can show you logs that show an attacker coming from one of your servers into one of our servers. However, that company ran AV, they ran a malware detection tool, and they concluded that there were there was nothing malicious on those servers. So thank you very much. Nothing to see here. Everything is fine. Not great. The two company C servers connected to the backup LAN were disconnected, so that our company ceased providing that backup service until they provided a report from a reputable IR company to say that they were clean. And having disconnected, the activity stopped. We did not see the attackers again at all. But meanwhile, APT39 had executed 11 queries against Oracle, extracting millions of records of data. How did they exfil? You remember those web shells on those OWA servers that we couldn't decommission? They simply stuck them in a zip file on those OWA servers and downloaded them. The final containment here was that every VPN user got a randomly generated password that they can't change. And they had to keep this randomly generated password until 2FA was implemented. So this is no longer you can choose your new password so that you can add one to the end. This is, we will give you an annoying, horrible password, and you will use that because you've demonstrated you can't be trusted. There's a risk here, right? Because if these are randomly generated horrible passwords, they're difficult to remember. On the balance, having somebody write that down on a sticky note on their screen is less risky in this given situation. And it was accepted that was acceptable until 2FA was implemented, which obviously you can imagine was being hurried along. So Operation Whack-A-Mole phased out. As I say, the attackers weren't seen, and that was the end of that incident. It was a tough one. As you can see, it did not go to plan, but these are the things that we have to be ready to react to. That back door via the backup LAN of that other company was something that we would never have detected that because they weren't using it. So they weren't, at the time we were preparing our first containment exercise, they weren't using that. So that was never going to trigger any DR alerts. There was no malware to be found, no implant to be found, because the implant was in company C. It wasn't in our victim company at all. So this is a provider attack, right? This is coming in through a third party. So until they used that other entrance method, which we forced by removing the VPN option, that's when we were able to detect it. We didn't foresee that users would add 1 to the number on the end. We should have done. Trust me, I check for that now. We make the instructions to users explicitly clear, and so there are definitely some lessons learned. I'm pretty much on time. We've probably got a minute or so left if any questions have crept in. Yeah, I'll hand back to the team at CREST if there's any questions or anything else that you need from me.
That's great. Thank you for that presentation, Adam. That's very, very interesting. Just to watch how the way that the attackers come in so many different means and how that can just change very rapidly. And I was very interested just by that password change, how it makes it so easy for them. So I think, yeah, it's a really interesting presentation, so thank you for that. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions. If anybody does have any questions for Adam, we've got a couple of minutes for those to come in, so please feel free to type those into the question pane now. So I'll give you a couple of seconds if you have got anything that you would like to type in there. But yeah, that seemed like a very exhaustive job that you were on that one.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And that's pretty typical of the sorts of things that we have to work with, the challenges we have to face. But that client was engaged and working with us in a very positive relationship. So that's always great to have the client on side. But yeah, when you're toe to toe against that kind of actor, I know an APT actor, they're always tough because you've got a good adversary. But I think that's what people in my field enjoy. That's the challenge.
Exactly, and yeah, you definitely got a challenge in that one, that's for sure. Well, we haven't had any questions come in, so I am sure that if anybody has anything that's a burning question, you have our emails at CREST, so please feel free to drop us a line and we can get something over to Adam, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. So thank you very much, and thank you, Adam. I really enjoyed that presentation. That was really interesting, so thanks for that today, and thank you for everybody for attending the webinar today. So just a last few words from Adam. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you again. Thank you for the time, thank you for the opportunity. I hope it was enjoyable for those of you out there. And yeah, as has been said, if you do have any questions or any follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to the QuEST team or to obviously to FIREEYE Mandiant ourselves. Thanks everyone, have a great day.
That's great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day. Take care.